former FBI agent who talked extremely critically about informants.
Yeah, James Weddick is a very interesting figure. He was at the Bureau for 35 years. He was a street agent. And, you know, I mean, this is the other thing. The use of informants in its own is not something new for law enforcement. It's something that's happened for decades. And it's something that law enforcement, it's a tactic that law enforcement relies on to crack investigations. They're very important. The difference is, he says, what happened after 9/11? One of the things he told me is that after 9/11, the rule book went out of the window. You weren't supposed to use informants in cases where there was no evidence of criminal activity. You're not supposed to use informants when the informants have a history of lying, history of bank fraud. I mean, this is something that Petra's been working on for years.
Petra.
Yeah, I think you see these informants oftentimes have criminal records that they want some assistance with from law enforcement, or they're facing deportation for other reasons. They get sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars from the FBI in expenses and, you know, basically payment for their services. There have been cases where informants have been shown to be using marijuana during the course of the investigation.
And this informant in the Newburgh case was convicted of bank fraud.
Yes, among many other things. And so any FBI agent, as Anjali is saying, it will tell you that once they're proven liars, you shouldn't be working with them. And yet there have been repeated cases where these informants are proven liars and then they're still used. And I think it goes to sort of a bigger dilemma for the FBI, because the question is really, what is the FBI supposed to do in these cases when they come across someone like a James Cromedy who seems suspicious? Should they investigate? Absolutely. Should they watch them? Yes. But should they be in the business of manufacturing plots, of manufacturing code words, of providing weapons, of basically creating these scenarios? I don't think so. I think that that starts to stray into very dangerous territory. And during the closing arguments of the Newburgh case yesterday, or earlier this week, one of the prosecutors was saying, are these defendants innocent-minded? And I think once we start thinking about defendants in terms of innocent-minded, we are straying into some very, very dicey territory. And the problem is when you're relying heavily on informants who themselves have very shaky credibility and have an agenda that is financially motivated or legally motivated, and you're dependent on them to provide the bulk of the evidence, it's just a recipe for disaster.
And you have this case where Newburgh is now going into jury deliberations, but in the context of a man who said he's a self-proclaimed terrorist. He did try to blow up Times Square. That case happening across the street. It's hard to imagine they don't know that that was taking place, and that's the context within which this very different case is taking place.
And you would think that we would be putting our resources into preventing another Faisal Shahzad from occurring, rather than spending the enormous amount of time and manpower and money that it takes to prepare a sting operation, which sometimes takes years.
And we just heard about the amount of money the informants were paid. The amount of money that went into each of these investigations runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when you think about the fact that these are sting operations on people that you have very little evidence of any wrongdoing or intent to kill Americans or intent to carry out plots, where's our focus? What are we doing?
We just saw the sentencing of the Pakistani scientist Afia Siddiqui to 86 years. She'll be serving in Texas, a case, Petra, you've been following.
Yeah, very complicated case. A lot of questions remain whether she was detained extra-legally by Pakistanis or whether the U.S. had any involvement. None of that was answered during her sentencing. Again, same courthouse as these other cases we're talking about today. But during her sentencing, she spoke for the first time extensively to the courtroom, and what emerged was somebody who seems mentally ill, quite frankly. And the psychiatrists who have examined her have said that she is potentially schizophrenic. So that is another very troubling case.
Finally, Anjali, we just have a few seconds, but you spent months in this investigation, traveling through communities, really bringing out the voices of people in these communities, particularly, of course, Muslims.
I mean, I think the most important thing to highlight is the sense of fear that is pervasive across these communities. Muslim communities that I met across New York and New Jersey are just getting more and more paranoid about being watched, about being surveyed, about every conversation being recorded. Any new person they meet, is this an informant? mosques are under surveillance. As we heard in the piece, Farhana Kara, the executive director of the group Muslim Advocates, said that there's been a ratcheting up of surveillance of Muslim Americans, of Muslims, immigrant Muslims in this country, and that's something we need to pay attention to.
Well, Anjali, congratulations. Thank you for this report, and thank you very much, Petra Bartosiewicz, for being with us. That does it for the show. I'll be in University of Missouri, Columbia on Saturday. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.